Commander Lyria stood frozen in the middle of the human station's command center, watching in absolute horror as every single interface screen flickered, twisted, and reorganized itself into complete nonsensical chaos. And the only thought screaming through her mind was how a simple gesture she'd made 3 days ago was about to cause an interstellar incident. The weapon systems menu now displayed cafeteria schedules. Life support controls had been replaced with entertainment databases, and the navigation console was somehow showing personnel bathroom usage statistics. Captain Marcus Chen stood beside her, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and then something that looked dangerously close to laughter. "Lyria," he said, with that maddeningly calm voice he used during crises. "Please tell me this isn't what I think it is." Her luminescent silver skin flushed a pale violet, her pointed ears drooping slightly in a gesture her people used to express embarrassment. And she couldn't meet his deep brown eyes as she whispered, "The Cubs saw me 3 days earlier." Lyria had arrived at Station Kepler for 2 as the first Venery liaison to humanity, her people's newest allies in a galaxy that was becoming increasingly hostile to both their species. She'd been nervous, her fingers constantly smoothing down her fitted tactical pants and adjusting the collar of her form-fitting navy jacket with its subtle silver accents that marked her diplomatic status. The humans had been kind, curious, overwhelming in their enthusiasm, and completely unprepared for how different Venery technology interfaced with users. Unlike human touchscreens that required physical contact on specific points, Venery systems responded to sweeping gestures, muscle memory patterns, and intuitive spatial reasoning, something her people had evolved over millennia of living in 3-dimensional coral cities beneath their planet's bioluminescent oceans. She'd been checking her personal datapad in the station's observation deck, her long platinum hair catching the light from the nearby star, when she'd noticed the children watching her. 7 human cubs, ranging from perhaps 4 to 9 standard years, sat in a small group during what their parents called Bring Your Family to Work Day, their eyes wide with fascination as her fingers danced through the air above her screen, swiping, circling, and pinching at invisible coordinates that somehow made her device respond. The smallest one, a girl with dark curls and missing front teeth, had smiled at her with such pure wonder that Lyria's heart had melted. "Pretty," the child had whispered, and Lyria had thought she meant the swirling Venery script on her screen, so she'd smiled back, performed an elaborate flourish that made her entire display spin and reorganize, and watched the children gasp with delight. She hadn't realized they were learning, studying, memorizing every movement. She definitely hadn't realized that human children possessed what the galaxy was slowly learning was humanity's most dangerous trait, the ability to observe something once and immediately try to replicate it. Consequences be damned, Marcus had sought her out that evening in the station's arboretum, where she'd been standing beneath earth, plants that reminded her of home, running her fingers along leaves that glowed faintly in response to her bioluminescent touch. "You looked lost during the briefing," he'd said, and she'd turned to find him watching her with those careful, intelligent eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Your people use different information hierarchies, don't they? Everything we do is linear, listed, organized in grids and menus." She'd nodded, grateful someone had noticed her struggling to find simple commands buried in nested folders and drop-down lists. "My people think in layers, in dimensions. Information floats around us. We reach for what we need, push away what we don't. Your systems feel like," she'd struggled for the word, "like walking through doors when I'm used to swimming through open water." He'd stepped closer, close enough that she could smell something pleasant and earthy about him, and pulled out his datapad. "Show me," he'd said simply. So she had, explaining how a Venery child could navigate their most complex systems by age 5 because the interface moved with thought and instinct rather than memorized procedures. She'd demonstrated on her own device, knowing it wouldn't work on his, her hands painting patterns in the air, and she'd caught him watching her face instead of her movements, something warm in his expression that made her skin pulse with soft light. "You're beautiful when you're passionate about something," he'd said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, your technology is fascinating. The way you interact with it, that's what I meant." But the way her heart had stuttered suggested they both knew that wasn't quite all he'd meant. The next 2 days had been a careful dance of professional interaction, underscored by growing personal connection. He'd shown her earth music, she'd shared Venery poetry that was sung in harmonics humans couldn't quite hear, but felt in their bones. She'd discovered he took his coffee with too much sugar. He'd learned she found human humor baffling, but laughed anyway because his smile was infectious. They'd work side by side adapting communication protocols, their fingers occasionally brushing over shared datapads, neither quite ready to acknowledge what was building between them, but both feeling it grow stronger each day. Then the children struck. It must have happened during the morning shift change when the station was busiest and the cubs were being shuttled between parents in different departments. No one had noticed 7 children moving through corridors with determined expressions, stopping at every interface panel they could reach. No one had seen small hands mimicking the patterns they'd watched Lyria perform, swiping and circling and pinching at screens that suddenly didn't know how to handle input they'd never been programmed to receive. The station's AI, confronted with gesture commands it interpreted as random touch patterns, had done what any confused system would do. It had tried to comply, and in doing so, had completely reorganized every single interface based on what it thought the users wanted. Medical emergency in Section 7, a voice crackled over communications, and Lyria's blood went cold. We can't access life support controls. The panels are showing reactor specifications. Marcus was already moving, his command training, overriding everything else. Manual override stations now. Engineering. Switch to backup control systems. But the response that came back made her stomach drop. Captain, backup systems are also scrambled. Whatever happened affected every networked interface on the station. Lyria's mind raced through possibilities, her diplomatic training, warring with rising panic. This was her fault. Her people's technology, her casual demonstration, her failure to understand that human children were apparently suicidal in their willingness to experiment. I can fix this, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The system is responding to Vanery gesture commands now. I can navigate it. Marcus turned to her, and she saw not anger but trust in his eyes. What do you need? Every screen to myself and complete quiet. The patterns are complex, and if I make one wrong gesture, she didn't finish, but he understood. He cleared the command center in 30 seconds, leaving just the two of them surrounded by dozens of scrambled screens and the weight of 3,000 lives depending on her muscle memory. Her hands began to move, calling on years of training, swimming through the air as she mentally mapped the human systems onto Vanery spatial logic. It was like translating between languages that didn't share alphabets, finding life support buried in what the AI now considered ambient environment management instead of critical systems. Sweat beaded on her forehead, making her skin's luminescence flicker irregularly. She could feel Marcus behind her, silent, supportive, not interfering, but present, and somehow that steadied her. The cubs were in the education wing, she said, as she worked, her voice tight with concentration. They saw me use my datapad. Humans, your children learn by imitation, don't they? They don't understand limitations, they just try. She heard the smile in his voice even through the tension. Yeah, human children are basically tiny scientists with no ethics committees. It's a miracle our species survived to reach space. Despite everything, she laughed, the sound breaking some of her panic. Her fingers found the right pattern, a complex spiral that pulled life support controls back to their proper screens. Medical has access again, Marcus confirmed, reading a still functional status board. You're doing it, but there were hundreds of systems, thousands of commands, and her arms were already trembling with fatigue. I can't fix them all individually, she admitted, her voice cracking. It would take days, and we need navigation, weapons, communications. She stopped, an idea crystallizing with sudden clarity. Marcus, what if we don't fix it? What if we teach it? He moved to her side, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Explain. The AI is trying to understand gesture commands. Right now it's confused. But what if we give it context? What if, instead of forcing it back to your old system, we create a new one? Hybrid. Both are methods. Her hands were still moving, finding critical systems, temporarily stabilizing them. Humans adapt. It's what you do best. I've been watching you, all of you, learning our language in weeks when it takes my people months. Eating foods that should be toxic to you just to be polite. Building technology from 17 different species into something new. What if your children just started the next evolution of human Vanery integration? She saw understanding dawn on his face, followed by something that looked like awe. You're talking about redesigning our entire interface system in the middle of a crisis. Using a framework, our two species developed together. Yes, she said, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since the chaos started. And I'm terrified, and it might fail spectacularly. But I think those cubs just prove that humans can already use binary systems intuitively. They didn't need training, they just needed to see it once. What if that works both ways? What if I can learn your logic structures while you learn my gesture patterns? Marcus was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, then he smiled that smile that made her heart do complicated things. Let's teach our AI something new. They worked in perfect synchronization. Lyria performing gestures while Marcus verbally tagged them with human command structures, creating a translation matrix in real time. She'd sweep her hand left to dismiss a panel, he'd confirm close window, and the AI would create a new association. She'd pinch her fingers to drill down into subsystems, he'd specify expand details, and another bridge formed between their technologies. Hours blurred together, and somewhere in the middle of teaching an artificial intelligence to think in 2 languages simultaneously, Lyria realized she was also learning to think like a human, linear and lateral at once. While Marcus's gestures became more fluid, more dimensional, their hands moved in parallel sometimes, nearly touching, and when she stumbled over a complex navigation command, his hand caught hers, steadied it, guided it through the correct pattern. Like this? He asked, his fingers warm against hers, and she nodded, not trusting her voice, because the touch sent light rippling across her skin in patterns that definitely weren't just from concentration. You're glowing, he said softly, wonder in his voice. It's beautiful. It happens when we feel strong emotions, she admitted, her usual diplomatic filters dissolved by exhaustion and proximity. I can't always control it. His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist, and she watched silver light pulse in response. I'm glad, he said. I was never sure if. Cross-species diplomatic protocols are complicated. And I didn't want to assume. Marcus, she interrupted, turning to face him fully, when this is over, when we've fixed this chaos, I would very much like to continue working with you. And not just professionally. The smile that spread across his face could have powered the station's reactors. I was really hoping you'd say that. A chime from the main console interrupted them, and they reluctantly separated to check the results. The AI had finished processing their new hybrid command structure, and screens throughout the station were reorganizing themselves into something neither purely human nor binary but beautifully integrated. Gesture controls alongside traditional menus, spatial organization with linear backups, systems that could be navigated by intuition or procedure depending on user preference. Captain, the station's AI spoke in its neutral tone. New interface protocols have been implemented. All critical systems are now accessible through both traditional and gesture-based commands. User adaptation training programs are ready for deployment. Also, 7 children and their parents are waiting in the corridor and appear quite anxious to speak with you. Marcus and Lyria exchanged looks, and she felt nervous laughter bubbling up. I suppose we should address the cubs who started this, she said. He took her hand again, deliberate this time, public and real, and she felt her skin glow brighter. Together, he confirmed. The children were indeed waiting, accompanied by mortified parents who began apologizing before the command center doors fully opened. But it was the small girl with dark curls who pushed forward, looking up at Lyria with worried eyes. Are you mad at us? She asked in a tiny voice. We just wanted to be like you. You made it look like magic. Lyria knelt down to the child's level, her diplomatic training reminding her that this moment mattered. That first contact wasn't just between governments, but between individuals, and that how she handled this would be remembered. What's your name? She asked gently. Mika. The girl whispered. Well, Mika, you and your friends did cause quite a lot of chaos today, Lyria said, and watched the child's face fall. But you also did something incredible. You looked at something completely alien, something you'd never seen before, and instead of being afraid or deciding it was too complicated, you just tried it. You experimented. You adapted. She glanced up at Marcus, who was watching with soft eyes. My people have a saying, the current that bends around obstacles finds new paths to the sea. You bent around the obstacles of not understanding my technology and found a completely new path. Because of you, humans and Vaneri will now share something we never would have thought to create together. Mika's face transformed with hope. Really? We helped? You started a revolution, Marcus added, crouching beside them. Though next time, maybe ask before swiping quite so many screens. The tension broke, parents laughing with relief, children chattering excitedly about the new interfaces they'd accidentally created. As the families dispersed, Mika turned back one more time. "You really are magic," she said to Lyria. "And pretty. And I think Captain Chen thinks so too, because he looks at you the way my dad looks at my mom." Then she ran off, leaving two adults blushing at the brutal honesty of children. "She's not wrong," Marcus said quietly, still holding Lyria's hand. "About which part?" she asked, though her glowing skin probably gave away that she knew exactly which part. "All of it," he admitted, "but especially the part about how I look at you." The station's next few weeks became a case study in human venery cooperation that was transmitted throughout both their civilizations. The hybrid interface system was refined, adapted, and eventually implemented on diplomatic vessels and shared facilities across multiple sectors. Researchers from both species collaborated on understanding why human children could so easily intuit venery gesture systems, leading to fascinating discoveries about parallel evolution in spatial reasoning and three-dimensional thinking. But for Lyria, the most important outcome was far more personal. She stood again in the Arboretum 6 months later, but this time she wasn't alone. Marcus was beside her, their fingers intertwined, watching earth plants glow faintly in response to her touch while he explained the botanical science behind bioluminescence with enthusiasm that made her love him more each day. "Did you ever imagine," she asked, "that day in the command center when everything went wrong, that it would lead to all this?" He considered, then shook his head. "I imagined us fixing a crisis. I didn't imagine we'd end up rewriting how the species interact with technology. I definitely didn't imagine that 7 children would become the most famous interface designers in known space, or that Mika would be designing her own hybrid systems before she turned 10, and us?" Lyria pressed, leaning into his shoulder. "Did you imagine us?" "I hoped," he admitted, turning to face her, his hands framing her face with gentle reverence. "From that first day when you explained thinking in dimensions instead of lines, I hoped. You made me want to see the universe differently, to think in layers, to swim instead of walk." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, feeling her skin pulse with light that had nothing to do with the plants and everything to do with the human who'd taught her that adaptation wasn't about losing yourself, but about finding new ways to be whole. When they separated, he was smiling. "Your people's saying about currents finding new paths," he said. "I think I finally understand it. The obstacles aren't just things to get around. Sometimes they're what direct you to exactly where you needed to be all along." Lyria thought about a curious child, a scrambled interface system, and a crisis that had forced her to bridge two ways of thinking she'd assumed were incompatible. She thought about how the worst moment of her assignment had become the foundation for everything that came after. "The current that bends around obstacles finds new paths to the sea," she quoted, then added her own ending. "And sometimes it finds something better than the destination it planned." "That should be on our wedding invitation," Marcus said, then froze. "I mean, eventually, if..." "That was presumptuous. We haven't even discussed." She stopped his spiraling with another kiss, longer this time, letting her bioluminescence paint them both in soft silver light. "Yes," she said simply. "When you officially ask, the answer is yes." Above them, the station's new hybrid interfaces hummed smoothly, gesture and touch working in perfect harmony. A constant reminder that the best solutions often came from the most unexpected chaos, and that sometimes the smallest hands could build the biggest bridges. And in the education wing, 7 children who'd accidentally changed the course of interstellar technological development were probably already planning their next experiment. Because that's what human cubs did, and the galaxy was slowly learning to be both terrified and grateful for it.